Next question comes from, oh, hi, my name is Josh. Shout out to him. This used to be my old neighbor in Hilo. He says, can you ask him if he thinks a non-resident tax for purchasing homes in the state would work?
Yes, this is not yes, but yes, this is a good question, and it is an important question. Here is the basic challenge, and the challenge is the trade-off. So Maui County, for example, changed its real property taxes so that they would charge more for short-term rentals and for non-owner occupied, or essentially, right, second and third homes, right? They did that a few years ago. I think it was 2016, and they've had it for a few years now. It helped them actually generate a fair bit of property taxes while being able to charge residents much less. There's a danger, though, which is they are now dependent on short-term rentals and non-owner occupied property for all of the government services, right? And so what you tax, you end up depending on in the long term, right? So if you tax income, you need workers to pay the income taxes. If you tax real estate, you need real estate to pay the real estate taxes. If you tax investors or people outside of Hawaii, yes, it does bring money in, but at a certain point, you become dependent on it like a drug. And of course, if politicians want to have more money, an easy way to get more money is to have more non-owner occupied investment real estate. So it is one of those policies that can be done in a balanced way, but you just have to be really careful about how you design it, because people's, I think, gut instinct is, yeah, just tax the hell out of it, right? If you do that, yes, it will help with revenue. Yes, local people will pay less in the way of taxes, but at a certain point, you might be dependent on it. There is a counter, right? Which is, let's say you just raise the tax to infinity so that nobody builds anything that's non-owner occupied. And some people want to do that. They say, raise the tax to infinity, and we're never going to build any more high-rise condos in Kakako that a Japanese person buys. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that local people get housing. There is a fair possibility that in that world, one, all of the real estate goes away in terms of the values, but also all the jobs associated with real estate. Hawaii, as a result, has a smaller economy, and some people may want that, but the consequence of that is going to be a lot of people who are unemployed. And a lot of those people who would be unemployed would be local people, Native Hawaiians. So it's just trade-offs. It's a good question, and it's something I think we should consider all kinds of policies to deal with our housing crises. But when we reflexively grab onto like just tax them, to infinity, we know how that plays out. So on Maui, for example, they started taxing short-term rentals at a really high rate a few years ago. After the fire, there was a real push to ban some of these short-term rentals, 7,000 of them. I don't know the exact number, so please don't quote me, but a large percentage of Maui County's tax base would be eliminated if they eliminated those short-term rentals. And so the question is, right, like, okay, does that mean fewer police officers or fewer firefighters or less trash collection, right? Like, where are you going to cut from the budget when you do that? Or are you going to tax local people more to make up for the shortfall? These are the kinds of questions that are hard and not really feel good. It's easy, and I was a housing advocate, and I define an advocate as someone who like has a position and they just want their position, right? And I care about the sea turtles. I care about building housing, whatever it is. It's fun to be an advocate because you don't really have to think about all the trade-offs and how everything is connected. On the other side of the table is somebody in government who does, right? Like a legislator, and we yell at them, peel-outicians, whatever you want to say. But every day, somebody in government has to think about these different trade-offs. And they may want to do something, but they may know that the consequence could be negative maybe 2 or 5 or 10 years from now. And so they can't do that. Everybody's yelling at them today, do it, do it, do it. And that's what makes being in government such a tough job, is having to deal with those trade-offs.
Yeah, and I think us hearing that and learning about the stipulations of, if I do this, than this, you know, and the effects that could happen if this is rushed or it's done ignorantly. So at least for me, I think it helps me understand a little bit more how it works in politics, and just me researching more and talking to other people had given me a lot of, you know, sympathy for, you know, government officials and stuff like that. For the housing stuff, I think it's always going to be the trickiest thing in Hawaii, especially in our generation. This is probably an unpopular thing to say. How when I hear people are like, oh, well, if another person, non-Hawaiian, is moving into these high-rise or whatever, that's taking a house away from a Hawaiian or a local.
Yep.
My counter, which I understand, is a Hawaiian, a local person like me and you, or, you know, anybody listening to this, we can't even afford to buy that place.
Sure.
So to me, I'm just like, right now, my biggest concern isn't like somebody moving into that place, because they're gonna, you know, they're gonna fund the economy because they're living here. I'm like, okay, I don't think these empty houses right over here, somebody moving in there is taking a house away from me or my friends. I don't think that.
Sure.
I think that's just something we're saying. I think the problem is we need to figure out how to make more money, because then that's the real issue.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, if I were able to afford it, and they're paying, I don't know, maybe just like $50,000 over the asking limit, they're taking that house that I would have bought because I put an offer in for that.
Yes.
But we don't even have enough money to put it in an offer.
Yes.
So that's my thing, is like, how do we get wages to increase? And I'm pretty sure there's a question here. So let me.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, though.
Okay.
I used to fly back from Maui to Oahu, and on one of my first flights back to Oahu from Maui, I was sitting next to this young man from Molokai. I think he was a junior in high school. And as we approached Honolulu, he looked out the window and he said, "Concrete jungle."
Yeah.
They live like rats down there. And I will never forget that, because, of course, he thinks I'm coming from Maui because I'm like, oh, I'm flying to Oahu for work. But actually, I grew up in the concrete jungle. I lived like a rat down there.
Yeah.
And I think about high-rise condos, right? So Kaka'ako is sort of infamous. People are like, there are no lights on at night. It's all foreign speculators. There's no locals that live there. One, that's not true. I live there. And
I live here.
I have neighbors that live there who work in all sorts of diverse professions, right? People that work in healthcare, people that work in business, people that work in nonprofits who live in my building or live in the building next to mine. Two, like, what was there before? So let's assume that like 80% of the units in the building that I live in are owned by Japanese people or Brazilians or Chinese people, and only 20% are owned by local. It used to be a CompUSA.
What do you mean by that?
The building, before the building, there was just a CompUSA there.
Oh, is that a business?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
sorry. The old computer store, right?
Oh, okay.
So like, it was like Best Buy before Best Buy.
Oh, okay.
It went out of business. That's why it's not there. So we look at this condo, and I talk to people all the time who are like, oh my God, they built all those condos, right? Like, I'm like, the condos replaced Pier 1, right? The condos replaced CompUSA. Nobody was protesting when CompUSA closed. Like, please don't close CompUSA. Nobody loved CompUSA. Now there are hundreds of people that live there, including me and my neighbors. I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. Would it be great if instead of there being 80% units that are occupied by people who are just here part of the year? For sure. Would it be great if it were all local families, all working families? Yes, I would much prefer that. But we have to be careful about the comparison, right? The comparison is not like that building versus another building. The comparison is that building versus the CompUSA that was there. And nobody misses the CompUSA. Most people don't even remember it being a CompUSA. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Dang, that's a really good point. I never looked at it like that. The only one I'm disappointed in is the one going up on Ohanahale Marketplace.
Yes.
Because I love that place. I love going to Ohanahale, going to all those little vendors. They had pop-ups over there. That's the only one I'm disappointed. I am going to miss that place.
Yep.
But when you put it into the CompUSA perspective, or like, you know, I don't want to say where I live, but places around here, like it's just like a restaurant or a business, and they're just replacing that or putting a building on these not residential spots over like
all the
these
commercial
properties. Yeah. I guess our biggest gripe is that there's not enough locals. Because even in my building, every time I see a local, it's like somebody working there, or once in a while, a realtor showing some other people not from the spot. And every time I meet somebody local, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right?
Yes.
Or it's literally like going out in the continent and seeing somebody wear a Hawai'i shirt, and you're like, hey, you're from Hawaii.
Yeah.
That's how it feels like seeing another local in our buildings and where we're living. And I think it's just we're complaining because there's not enough locals, and there's not enough locals because locals don't make enough money.
Yes. No, and that's right. So if housing prices went to infinity, it would be fine as long as wages went to infinity. The problem is housing prices have gone to infinity and wages are still the same that they were 10 years ago. And part of that is just the structure of Hawaii's economy, lots of service industry, tourism, hospitality, where wages typically don't track along with inflation. And part of it is an increase in people moving here whose incomes do track along with inflation. I always think about there are two types of professions that track inflation and professions that don't. And people in those two paths live totally different lives. So like real estate obviously tracks inflation. Usually lawyers increase their wages with inflation. Healthcare, a lot of times, for doctors, right, their wages go up. But for sort of low wage service jobs, they don't keep pace with inflation. And so every year they're struggling more and more to afford housing, to afford groceries. And these are like structural big economic problems that we have to resolve. And they're not just Hawaii problems, they're United States problems, but these are just problems that countries face with inflation. And I think it's almost like a misplaced anger, right? Where like we could go and we could yell at Howard Hughes and be like, stop building condos. But that's not going to fix inflation, right? That's not going to fix these bigger, broader political issues that do require our attention and we should be trying to resolve so that people aren't struggling.
Yeah, and that's my thing too, is I'm not somebody who wants to complain at the circumstances. Taxes is going to be taxes. Inflation is going to be inflation. The win is going to be the win, right? What was it saying? You can't change the win. You can only adjust the sales. I'm somebody who adjusts the sales. So if, our wages aren't, or we don't have positions that can pay enough, create a position that pay enough. And of course, all of this is way easier said than done.
Sure.
It's hard to live in Hawaii. Cost of living is so expensive.